I want to welcome you all. If anybody would like to start by putting your, where you're zooming in from, that would be wonderful. This morning, I'm very grateful to both Lisa and Lori for joining us this morning to talk about some tools that they've developed. I was just thinking in our conversation prior to beginning this that, I was thinking about the deaths that I had early in my life and how hard it was to have any kind of conversations about anything without either feeling like I was hammering somebody over the head with information that I hoped that they could give me or that I needed from them or that I hoped they would consider, or just no conversation at all. And so these tools that they have developed are wonderful. So I'm really grateful that they're going to be here this morning with us. I do want to just take a moment to introduce, for those of you that might be joining us for the first time, a little bit about the Elisabeth Kübler-Ross Foundation. My name is Susan Barber, and I curate the community education program for the foundation. I also want to say thank you to everybody who is in a position where they could make a donation. This program is not supported by any grant funding or anything like that. It's only through the donations of people who attend. And our goal is to keep these programs at no cost so that they're available to everybody that can find some use in them. So the Elisabeth Kübler-Ross Foundation began a year after Elisabeth died, and it currently is run by her son, Ken Ross, who I believe is joining us this morning for a brief time. And the foundation runs programs, collaborations, educational programs, and chapters around the world. And some of the things that the foundation is doing, I am just always shocked when I talk to Ken. It's a geography lesson because the foundation is in places across the globe, developing a compassionate community program with St. Luke's Hospital in Singapore. They've opened an 18-bed respite center in Guatemala for people who have cancer, and they're providing free medical services for those recovering from chemotherapy. In Chile, there's initiated the first pediatric hospice there. They're developing end-of-life programming with Stanford University, which also is holding most of Elisabeth's archives with the intention to make them public and available online to people. The foundation in Mexico chapter started the Green Burial Movement in Mexico, and also the first death doula program in Spanish offered in Central America. In Japan, there's been more than 50 of Elisabeth's death-dying, life, death, and transition workshops. In France, more than 7 locations around the country, continuing Elisabeth's mission to support death and grief support services. Ken told me this morning that they're launching through the Argentina and in the Uruguay chapters, hospice volunteer training, and the foundation is supporting the creation of the very first hospice program in East Timor, which is just a remarkable thing since Ken and the board are doing this with really just the power of their beings. And Elisabeth has been known worldwide as the death and dying lady and the person who developed the 5 stages. But Elisabeth is also an incredible liver of her life. Like, she lived her life to the fullest, and she encouraged people to live their lives as fully as possible until their very last breath. And today, to introduce both Lori and Lisa, just a little bit about both of them. I'm going to ask them to spend a little bit more time introducing themselves. Lori was a writer, an entrepreneur, and an eternal optimist. She lives in living life fully after loss and has dedicated her life to helping others survive and thrive after experiencing death and personal tragedy. After losing both her mother and her husband to cancer in 2008, Lori found footing and taking small steps into the unknown before realizing that going with the ebb and flow instead of resisting resulted in the gift of positive outcomes. She has a long list of titles, and I'm going to ask her to talk a little bit more, especially about this idea of post-traumatic growth. Lisa is a LCSW, social worker in hospice and emergency medicine. And her goal is to help people cope with illness, dying, and grief with a passionate belief that peace at the end begins with meaningful conversations over time, and that the more we can engage in talking about difficult subjects while people are alive and feeling pretty healthy, the more prepared and ultimately comforted they'll be at the end of their life. Lisa, and Lori, I'm just so grateful to you both for being with us today. And I'm going to bring you both down here, and I'm going to disappear here from this spotlight. And please, this is yours now. And I look forward to your conversation. I do want to say preemptively that Lisa and Lori prepared some beautiful polling questions that, in my lack of experience with polling, may work great, but this is on me and certainly not on them. So thank you all. And for those just arriving, if you want to put up in the chat where you're arriving from, that would be really wonderful. I see San Francisco, Canada, New York, people from all over the country, and the UK are here. Canada is here. Thank you all for being here. And Lori and Lisa, please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Susan. And thanks everyone for being here this morning, taking your time out to learn a little more about us and our journey and the tools that we have created to hopefully help others have these conversations, have them early, and be better prepared when death comes. I come to this from a very personal experience, personal tragedy, actually, with, as Susan said, the death of my mother and husband within a month's time. And, that was something that I, was not prepared for, although with my husband, we felt like we were prepared for, because before we had started a family, we met with the financial advisor, and we did the kind of boilerplate forms, and we had our wills and the paperwork that we think people should have, but yet we didn't have conversations. And when he was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in his early 40s, that's not the time to start those conversations. And at that time, we were on the hope train. We were holding hope, he was going to make it. And that was what, got him through that year. But unfortunately, the cancer did take his life. And the last 2.5 weeks, when he was on home hospice, is when I met Lisa. And Lisa came in as the hospice social worker and was the one that sort of helped to guide me through to answer those questions that we didn't know to ask. So we were left in a very chaotic position at the end with not knowing anything about the death process. Especially surprising was that he lost his ability to speak. And I didn't know that was going to be a thing. I mean, silly me, coming from, background in Hollywood, and I should know that's not the way it is. But when it came to that moment, it really took us off guard. And I had to, I knew him very well, but I had to make a lot of decisions that we really should have discussed earlier. So again, Lisa, hospice social worker, came in within an entire hospice staff as well that came in. But that became a pivotal moment in my life of experiencing that death. And Lisa provided bereavement support after for many months. And the question that just kept coming up was, why weren't we prepared? Why did we not go over these questions? Why did we not have conversations? Why did we not do these things that we should have, especially knowing that he had a terminal cancer diagnosis? So those conversations that I had with Lisa, that bereavement support, the grief that I was going through, sort of led us to talking about, well, why and what can we do? Because Lisa sees it every day with her work at families that are just so unprepared. So it became sort of a personal mission of mine to do something, to help people, to make something that could help give people a tool to have these conversations. So I will toss it to Lisa to tell a little bit more about her experience. But from those conversations became this idea to create this game.
Each time we have one of these conversations, I am thrust back into imagining knocking on the door of Lori's house in Los Angeles, and walking into her home and feeling so much love and seeing these little children and so much love, but also chaos. And the chaos came from there being so many things that were unclear about what Joe's wishes would be, and multiple family members with different opinions about what that might look like, or what his wishes would be. And, you know, what's so interesting is that Lori and Joe really were more prepared than I would say the majority of the hospice patients I see that are under 70 years old. They had done quite a bit of paperwork, but as we all know, or many of us know, you know, you can get that paperwork done, and it's wonderful in terms of legal purposes and giving you authority to make decisions and those sorts of things. But that doesn't mean that there have been any conversations about what that paperwork actually entails. And most of the time, advanced care planning is just a couple questions. You know, there's some wonderful tools that kind of stretch that out a little bit more. But what I have found, both in hospice and in working in the ER setting, is that it's the conversations that really give people the confidence to make decisions. You know, oftentimes, if someone comes into the emergency room and they've had a massive heart attack, and all of the healthcare professionals are coming around and beginning to ask questions about what the person would want, there isn't immediately the paperwork. You know, who cares about the paperwork? They're going to talk to the family, and they're asking the family what is his wishes. And usually at that moment is when people who have had these conversations can have a very clear and distinct answer of what the wishes are, who's the decision maker, and then things proceed. But oftentimes it's chaos and struggle, and these are such emotional times for people, whether it's hospice or emergency room setting. Emotions are so high, and it's so hard to make decisions and feel confident that you're making the right decision. And what I've learned over time too is that when you don't have the confidence that you are making the right decision, it can impact your grief experience too. And to me, that's so heartbreaking when people are second guessing the decisions that they made because they didn't really know. And then they're on the back end having a lot of, you know, complicated feelings about that. So I was so excited to team up with Lori and create these products to help people begin to have these conversations. And, you know, our goal and our purpose is so that people can be more prepared and have less conflict and more confidence in making decisions for their family and close loved ones. So we began, Lori and I actually took a little break from when I was her hospice social worker, and we became friends a few years later. And that's when we developed the Death Deck. And the Death Deck, the idea was, let's try to make this fun. Let's create something that not only gets people talking about death and dying and normalizing that it's okay to have these conversations, but let's try to make it fun. So we used multiple choice questions and a little bit of humor to try to bring a little levity to the conversation. And that's the game that we're going to start with today. And then what we've learned in that time, though, is that the Death Deck is a great tool for starting the conversations, used for advanced care planning and all sorts of great opportunities. But the EOL deck came out of the idea that bringing this particular deck into a hospice patient or palliative care or cancer patient's room, not everybody felt comfortable with that, and not all the questions are appropriate to be asking when death is closer. So that's how we came up with the idea to come for the EOL deck, which is also multiple choice questions, has a little bit of humor, but it's very respectful. And this is what we created for hospice, palliative care, ICU, people with serious illness and advanced age, for when death seems a little bit closer. Lori, I'll toss back to you to just talk a little bit more about where we've seen our decks being used and a little bit more about differentiating between the two.
Yeah, so the death deck was really created to get people to have these conversations before they were given a terminal diagnosis or before they needed to have the conversations. We really wanted to reach people like that point where, you know, Joe and I were filling out those financial advanced care planning documents. I mean, that was the time to start having these conversations. And we really wanted to reach a wide general population audience to make it more comfortable to even say the word death. I mean, it's the game by design has the word death in it, although we did get some pushback at the beginning, like, why would you do that? It's like, because we want people to be comfortable saying the word death. And we have a cute little skull because we want people to be comfortable, you know, seeing a little skull. So that was the original intention of the game, to get it on the shelves with, you know, next to other game night games, you know, the Cards Against Humanities and things. Although we like to be the Cards for Humanity, we did like to have that reach more of a game playing audience. But the people who have found us and were really using us were with the end of life communities. That's why we decided to customize and make this smaller deck that has more of those questions just for end of life. And another difference is the humor. We try to use humor in the death decks because we find that makes it a little more comfortable having these conversations. And Lisa pointed out multiple choice. That was something by design as well, because we feel like what was out there that we were seeing to open these conversations or to have these conversations were just open-ended questions. And we feel like if someone is given a big question about death and it's open-ended and they haven't thought about it or they don't know what they would answer, a lot of times it becomes more sort of a stalling, or it just sort of ends with that one question. But by providing multiple choice, if someone hasn't thought about the answer or hasn't even heard of the question, they are able to sort of line up with what feels right in the moment. Like, oh, I hadn't really thought about that, but I guess I would be A or maybe B. And we're going to get into some gameplay in a little bit. And we encourage, you know, the A/B answers or even the D. But as long as people are starting to think about it, to come up with it, to write things down, and to acknowledge, you know, what these questions mean and where their answers might go is really the important part of the game. So games have been used anywhere from financial planners to aging communities. We've had hospice, as Lisa was saying, she's been using the death deck and now the EOL deck in her hospice setting. Funeral directors, there's questions about final dispositions and whatnot. We're doing a game night with a mortuary. So it runs the gamut of a lot of different places where these cards can be used. My acupuncturist has purchased a deck and she puts it with her other tarot cards. So it's kind of a different thing. People, I think, are intrigued by it. I think people who, I mean, I don't know about this. I think this community is very comfortable talking about death, but those who aren't, you know, it's something that within talking about it is very interesting. If you don't have a death imminent and you start to talk about death in the afterlife, it's fascinating. I really think that there's some fascinating conversations and a way for people to come together and bond as well. Mm-hmm. So how did I cover that, Lisa?
Oh, you did great, Lori.
Thank you.
I think the other piece, you know, as you were talking, it's interesting to me as a social worker who my entire job is focused on talking and listening. I should say listening more than talking. But when we created the death deck, it was all about preparation. We wanted people to be prepared. And what I didn't really think about until we started playing it, and until I started carrying this in my bag everywhere I go and bringing it out in all these random settings, I didn't realize how much I would love the connections that I feel with people when I'm having these type of conversations. And that's some of the wonderful feedback that we've been getting from people is the depth of conversations. You know, start these conversations, bring a couple questions into this wine bar that I go to. And on any given night, there's different people there. And, you know, we'll start with questions about whether we think that people can communicate with the dead via mediums. And then we'll launch into storytelling of people's experiences, you know, with having their loved one visit them after death, you know, in different signs, and the conversation just flows. And at the end of the night, I feel so connected to the other people that I'm having these conversations with. So that's just been a really additional piece. And one of the aspects that I even talk about with my hospice families is, I know these conversations seem daunting, and it's even harder when we know that death is close, you know, it's coming. But the richness of conversations when we take the lead to have these type of conversations, the depth of the connections that we feel, it has that as an additional payoff. In addition, you know, not just the preparation, but the meaning behind these conversations. So I know since you're here today, we might be kind of, as we tend to do, preach to the choir. But, you know, as you talk about having conversations, whether you use our tools or not, but as you are out in the communities talking with people, I think it's a valuable additional bonus that people have when we can launch into these conversations on death and dying. So I think we can probably get started with our questions now, unless Susan, if you had anything else you wanted us to cover.
No, I'm so grateful for this conversation. I was taken right back to my parents' living room when my father was dying at age 67, something relatively unexpected. And he was sick about 8 months, but he had a remission. So we weren't expecting this. And my two brothers arrived and did not want to give him pain medication because they felt that he should be conscious. And that was not my sense of my father, who he was or how he wanted to go, but it was turning into a very not good sibling argument. And I just asked my mother, like, by any chance, have you done an advance directive? It was 1995. And in fact, it was locked in a safety box in the basement and nobody had ever seen it. You know, so pulling it out, my father had actually written what he wanted for pain management, which was everything he could possibly get in his body. You know, and so had we had this conversation, if we had any way to have this conversation, years later, at my mother's 89th birthday, I brought my own advance directive because I wanted a conversation. Mostly I wanted to hear from her because she was never telling us anything about her plan. And once I said what I wanted, she right away told us everything that she wanted, mostly what she didn't want, which was great because a year later, when she was dying very suddenly, she behaved in a way like she went to the hospital and wouldn't stay in the emergency room like 3 nights in a row. And I said, you guys, this is exactly what she told us, like that she's following exactly her plan. So now we just have to get behind it. It saved hours of sibling discomfort. So having these conversations in advance of really like serious illness, any way you can do it, I think is just so beautiful. So I just am touched by this and the connections that do happen when you're having these conversations, not in an ER or in a really stressful environment where everybody's like, ah. So thank you. And that's just, I feel a lot of gratitude that you're both doing this and that you're here today. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, well, the best way to really get a sense of what these cards are like is to play. So I'm going to share my screen and share some of the cards. Again, the decks themselves are about 75% multiple choice. We do have about 25% open-ended. For today, we're just using the multiple choice. We'll do some cards first from the death deck, and then we'll transition to some cards from the EOL deck. We do have a poll where you can click on the polls quizzes on your Zoom screen down there on the bottom and answer. For the questions, we'll go one at a time. If you want to just answer one of the questions at a time, even though you can scroll all the way down the poll and answer all of them, for those of you who like to get ahead of yourselves, please don't. Just concentrate on the question one at a time, and then we'll sort of discuss where we end up with the questions. And if you have any additional questions or comments, you can put them in the chat, and then we'll do some Q&A after, where we can talk a little bit more deeper on some of the things that might have come up. So With that
Lori?
being said, yes.
Lori, somebody has put up in the chat a question that I think other people may also have, so maybe to address this up. They wanted to know if there's overlap between the two decks and if there's questions that are the same in both decks. So
There's, as you would imagine, the topics overlap, but they're all, the EOL deck has all new questions. So we may, you know, we ask several questions about disposition options in both decks, but they're worded differently because our death deck is for our general audience and the EOL deck is for people with serious illness. Oh, and thank you, Robin. Robin just chimed in and said, I have both. They are different.
thank you.
So the topics overlap, but we go much deeper in the EOL deck on end of life preferences and legacy, whereas the death deck has a lot of general questions about your beliefs and thoughts on everything death related. So you can think of the EOL deck as really zeroing in on end of life preferences. So if you are a hospice or palliative care or you know, working with people with serious illness, probably the EOL deck is what you want to use with those clients. If you're doing education with your family out in the community, everyone else, the death deck is the best tool. So obviously we created both for different groups of people and different purposes, and we encourage you to have both. But if you're looking for what is best for your group, that's kind of the general guideline.
Okay, and you should be just seeing my screen, or are you seeing the cards on the bottom?
We're seeing the cards on the bottom too.
Okay, well, I'm gonna redo that then. All right. You can keep talking. I'll be up with
Okay.
in just a second.
Well, Susan, I wanted to go back to a comment that you made about the with your mom. When you mentioned that when you brought your own advanced directive, she was able to open up. And I find this to be a great strategy in trying to talk to people about their end of life preferences. I mean, how can we expect people to really be vulnerable and open up if we're just grilling them with questions and not talking about our own wishes too? So even when I'm answering, when I use the EOL deck with my patients, you know, I'll tell them, I will basically ask them if they'd like, I'll answer the questions as I would as well. And we can have a conversation about it rather than just putting them on the spot repeatedly, time and time again, without revealing anything of ourselves, because we are really asking people to be vulnerable. Some of the questions are more vulnerable than others, but, you know, obviously I'm keeping some professional distance in how I'm talking about things, but I'm still willing to have a conversation with people about these topics as well.
Wonderful. So now you should have the slide
Yes.
up. Is that correct?
Yep.
Okay, so we will go to the first card. Again, I will read it and then we will open the poll. All right. So the first question: growing up, my family dealt with death, A, by talking openly, sharing feelings, stories, and dark humor. B, in a no-nonsense sort of way, shit happens, you move on. Or C, keeping it all bottled up and avoiding any discussion.
Okay, and I'm going to put up the poll. And the first question, if somebody from the audience, just one person, maybe Penny, if you could, or Ken, if you could unmute and just let me know if you're seeing this up on your screen. It's going to take a second.
Yes, the poll has just come up.
Thank you. Technology is so fabulous when it actually works. So if people want to just choose choice A, choice B, choice C, and if the poll is sort of overwhelming, you could also put an answer in the chat. You could just put.
Oh, excuse me.
Oh.
Yeah,
it's not the same.
Yeah, they don't match.
Okay, we're looking
They
at
do. It's
question
the
two
second
here.
group. It does match what's on the screen, the second.
Oh,
Yeah.
the second question.
Second
Thank you.
question, yeah.
Number
thank
two.
you. Perfect, thank you. So if you want to put it up in the chat, if the polling isn't working for you, you could just put openly, no nonsense, or bottled up for your response.
Well, I think that the problem is that Lori's screen has the second question on it, and then
Look at
pretty, so
that.
that's where the confusion is,
So
so.
we'll start with the second question. Can we do that?
Yes.
Should-
Yeah. Yeah, and I think
Okay.
also that this is true. We were talking about this earlier, that the questions, we can't answer them, like they have to submit all of the questions for them to show up here.
we see that now. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Penny. Thank
So-
you for all of you out there that are helping us with this.
Yes. So how about we go back to the first, well, let's start with the question that we're at right now, that we can see as number 2. Growing up, my family dealt with death, A, by talking openly, sharing feelings, stories, and dark humor, B, in a no-nonsense sort of way.
Oh, it's coming up now. Yep, there we go.
Oh, you got it. Shit happens, you move on, or C, keeping it all bottled up and avoiding any discussion. So I will say, for me, this, my family was an A all the way. My father loves to use dark humor, threaten people to be out of his will, talk about all sorts of dark topics, but I did grow up on a farm, and death was just part of our life as well with the animals. So I was fortunate to grow up in an A household. Susan, I'm curious what your answer is to this question.
Oh, absolutely C. Absolutely. Nobody talked about, my grandmother died one day. It was my mother literally broke down almost on the floor. The 3 of us young children were just out of our minds with fear. And then it was never spoken about again. It was like she just disappeared.
Susan, it's not letting us submit on the screen. Is that what you
It's
expected?
because
or-
you have to answer all of the questions. in
Oh,
order-
okay. So do we,
Trying to do them one at a time.
you'll
Penny.
move it for us? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, so we were a hardcore C family, and that continued for myself personally until I was 30 years old.
Wow. Yes. And Lori, what was your family?
Yeah, again, it's the combination. It was a little bit of B, so it happens, you move on, but then there was no follow-up discussion. So there was, the grieving part of it, that part, the aftermath of it, we didn't talk about. So I think that's what also added to the difficulties and the confusion when in my adult life, I had these 2 deaths happen so close together. So I wish we would have been a little more open and talking about death and the process and I think it would have been helpful. So
I'm looking at the answers, and again, we apologize everyone for the challenges with the polling.
yeah.
But I'm looking at the answers, and when you scroll down on the polling questions screen, you should be able to see everyone's answers as well. And it looks like we are to the highest point under the keeping it all bottled up and avoiding any discussion. That's at 53% right now, and the A and B are a little bit lesser, B only 18% and A 29%. So I think overall it's fairly common that there isn't a lot of discussion around death and dying. We hope what we've been seeing from all of you and from the wonderful increase in openness of talking about death and dying, that maybe we'll be able to shift our culture to more families talking about it, and we'll have more A's and B's as we, for those of us with kids, we raise our kids to be more comfortable with those conversations. So, do we want to go back to our first question?
Yeah, let's
then?
do that. And maybe since it looks like the poll part might be getting confusing, why don't we turn the poll part off and just talk about the questions and see if we can generate some conversation that way.
Oh.
And I'm going to go back to the first card and we can go over that. And if, someone has a comment, we can do it that way. Let's see. There we go. So you're approaching the end of life. Others are making your healthcare decisions. Should price factor in? A, yes, don't blow through my savings to prolong the inevitable. B, in moderation, necessary expenses are fine. Or C, spare no expense buying me every extra second.
So I really like this question because what I have found in emergency medicine, in hospice, talking to families, is that a lot of times people do have very distinct beliefs on this. I've talked to so many older adults who are horrified at the thought of their money being, quote, wasted on keeping them alive at the end of their lives. And other people who are on the opposite side of the spectrum, right? Like, why would you let any cost get in the way of me having every moment? So I think that this is one of our more practical questions. And I think sometimes the answers, if you were to ask family members these questions, you might be surprised by the answer, and it can help guide some of those decisions. So and I recognize that not everyone can see the answers, our results. And it's interesting, in this group, we have 0% of people saying that spare no expense. And we have almost, it's pretty even, 40-60, 40 with A and 60 with B. So I think as a whole, a lot of people are kind of with that moderation. Susan, was that ever anything that was discussed with your parents?
My father's only question to me in the 8 months that he was ill, well, this is about a week or so before he died, was, do I have to pay for a casket if I'm being cremated because it's too expensive? And we were like, no, we're just going to put you like in a brown bag and we'll just put you out in the yard. He was like, okay, that sounds perfect. Yeah, that was his only concern at all, was about how expensive this was going to be. And so, but nothing in terms of the kind of care he was getting, because it was very limited what was available to him.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think those questions, the disposition, right? How much people want their family to be spending on burial or cremation or other disposition options. Again, these are things that people often have their own beliefs about, but when we don't talk about it, we don't really know how our family members or those close to us feel.
Lisa, one thing that I'm thinking about, this would come up a lot when I was working in hospice. And families did not want to spend the money for a caregiver, even if it would be very beneficial. You have a 99-year-old patient and their 98-year-old spouse, and they don't want to spend the money. And the volunteers would often come back and say, they want somebody there every day, but they don't want to spend the money, even if they had the money. They didn't want to spend it. So yeah, this is something that would be so useful to have a conversation way upstream about.
It is useful because it helps people plan for that time, right? If dad's going to fight you on every penny spent for his care, then there needs to be more family, neighborhood, community support increased. And that is the plan for caregiving. If it's gonna break his heart to see his hard-earned money going out, then what does that look like? I mean, sometimes it's just a hard conversation where it's like, well, we actually have to spend some money on this, but there is so much value, once again, of just kind of putting everything out there. I love Robin's comment. She said, my mom said, don't give me dead flowers, purchase them while I can still smell them. And I think that is really I mean, that's a lot of it, right? Don't spend all this money in these ways. I want you to do this with the money, right? And people have strong opinions about that. Okay, and yes, a couple of people commenting that people don't want to spend money on their care, and that's a very common feeling, especially among our older adults, for sure. So are we? I think this is
We're on the next question.
Okay.
So dying people often claim to see deceased family members in their final days. I believe those visions are A, spirits welcoming them to the afterlife, B, images the brain produces to help ease the dying process, or C, a whole lot of unconfirmed crapola.
I am seeing quite a few A's on our in our group here, and when I look at the polling, it's also 70% A and 35% B. So which Lori, I know that this is a favorite topic of yours. What is your experience with this one?
Yeah, I mean, I am definitely an A with spirits welcoming them to the afterlife. And with this question and a lot of the questions, it's very non-denominational. We don't want to have religion be something that is a stumbling block or something that comes up. But I think that the words that we use are with afterlife and whatnot in a lot of the cards are universal. So they can apply to, whether it's the spiritual world, whether you believe in heaven, whether, whatever you believe, you can use that terminology of afterlife. So there wasn't really anything with either Joe or my mom having this experience, but I feel like from the other side of it, with having signs from them of showing themselves, I believe that there's something there. And I definitely believe that in that transitional process, there is this sort of welcoming, which is to me comforting.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, it's surprising to me how often my hospice patients will, as they are transitioning, even a few weeks prior to death, will start to talk about visions of their mother or their spouse that's deceased, or pointing to people in the room and commenting on who they are. And so what's most beautiful to me about the whole process is that I've never witnessed a person who's been fearful when they've had a family member, or whatever you think that is, whether it's the family member or whatever their brain's doing, but it's always been very peaceful and accepting of this person coming in. And it's also very common for people to talk about going home. They'll be at their home and they'll say, I want to go home, I'm going home, I'm going on a trip. There's a lot of metaphors that people also talk about as they're in the final weeks of their life. So this question is kind of more curiosity and connection more than it is planning for anything. But it is interesting sometimes the stories that come out of people sharing. Yeah. So we can go to the next one.
Right. So you're dying. Should your family err on the side of A, over medicating, let me ride off into the sunset on a magical unicorn? B, moderation, I want to say my goodbyes, but not be in pain. Or C, caution, minimal medication, I want to be as present as possible. And I think Susan just noted on that a little earlier of, that whole question of how people want to be medicated at the end. And this is something that I struggled with. I had issues with, other family members of what, we felt should be the right way. And it was very confusing and we didn't know what Joe really wanted. So I had to guess, but I think it's very important to let our family members know our personal choice of what we would like. I mean, I hover between B and C. I want it to be, minimal. I don't want to be in pain, but I feel like there's something to be had in that process. Now, I may feel differently in 20 years, but for right now, if something was happening, I think I would want to be present and be experiencing whatever that process was. Of course, not excruciating pain, but something to where I wasn't over medicated to where I couldn't converse or say goodbye.
This question about medication to me is one of the most important questions that needs to be talked about with people who are going to make decisions for you when you can't speak, because this is where typically a lot of arguing among family members comes in, like as in the case that Susan brought up earlier. And when I have a family arguing about the use of pain medicine or anxiety, agitation medications at end of life, if the person has done an advanced directive and clearly said in there that they would like, all pain medications to be used to get them to a place of comfort, or language that says very clearly what their wishes are, and has had conversations about it, then we can then honor those requests from that person, and the arguing over the bedside is minimized. This also comes into play because oftentimes when people have hired caregivers, sometimes the caregivers have really negative views on the use of morphine and other medication at end of life. And being able to adequately say what the person's wishes are helps the whole team, because these hired caregivers sometimes become, quite a person in the ear of the family member who is hearing from hospice, we think your loved one's in pain, we recommend these things. And so at the end of the day, this question and talking about medication is a really, really important one in my mind. And it looks like from our polling, we had about 20% A and C, and the middle group is the majority, which is quite honestly what I see in hospice as well, I'd say.
All right. After you die, how long should your significant other wait before dating? A, love is unpredictable, grab it when you can. B, 6 months to a year, then it's fair game. Or C, at least a few years, or you better believe you'll be haunted.
So this question has created some lively conversations when Lori and I have had the opportunity to play this a couple times with couples. I like Robin's comment. She's still going to come haunt you, but go ahead. I think that it's, again, if you can have this conversation with your significant other prior to anything health related in your lives going on, or before a serious illness diagnosis, it does help to just understand where that person is coming from. And, like Lori, I don't think you and Joe talked about dating afterwards or anything. No. Yeah. What do you think his answer would have been?
I think his answer would have been A. I think he would want me to be happy and find love again and, live life to its fullest. I am more of a B. And not that I would need permission, but again, it's a nice conversation to have. It would have been nice to hear from him those words. But I felt like after he died, just being in the headspace of people would ask, are you gonna, 6 months in, are you dating? And it's like, am I remembering to put on my shoes is probably a better question. Like that was not for me personally, was not on the radar. I think, dating, meeting someone new, even, up to 2 years for me in my personal experience was, I just was not ready. I needed to work on my own grief and my grieving process. But I do. I think that, and, I would want, my significant other to give it its time to grieve, give yourself time to grieve. But live your life, be happy, find love.
We have some great comments in the chat I want to talk about. Mike commented that elderly persons are quicker to be in a relationship for companionship. And I definitely see that to be the case in my work. I think, a death at 43, as Nicole had, is very different than a death at 85. And often the conversations are different, and the companionship desire to spend people's last years in companionship is different than someone in their 40s. I really like that Teresa commented, children understanding this wish is big for everyone. And that's a really important piece, because that is typically where the problems lie, is when people begin dating after a death, and the children or other family members or people thinking that it's too soon or it shouldn't happen at all. And so again, I know that what we're proposing is that people talk about literally everything, and that is what we're proposing. But as much as you're able to have these conversations, and that we've created a little tongue-in-cheek way for you to do it, is so that you can talk it all out and everyone feel more comfortable.
And there are no right answers. Everyone's grieving process is different. For some people that date right away, that's wonderful for them. If someone doesn't ever want to date again, that's fine for them. It's just, we're all different. But back to your point, Lisa, it's important, I think, to talk about and to have those conversations. And especially the comment that came, I can't see the comments, but for the children, that's such a wonderful point to bring up. All right, we're moving on. Regarding your important documents, your will, life insurance, healthcare directive, A, my family knows exactly where to find them. B, they are filed together and should be easy to find. Or C, they may or may not exist, so good luck finding them.
Okay, I'm looking at the poll here just to see. Oh, we're pretty evenly split in the polling, and it's looking pretty evenly split in the chat here too. We have 45% for A, 30% for B, and 35% for C. So we're at different levels of preparedness here. While we do focus on the conversations, we also do really encourage everyone to have your documents in order, because the legality and having the authority to make healthcare decisions for someone, particularly the advanced directive, when I meet with hospice families, that's the number one thing that I am focused on initially, is who's your decision maker, because sometimes there are very different views on, what the care that we provide based on the family members. And so knowing who that decision maker is really important. And so, we encourage everybody to do their preparation and paperwork.
Yeah, and this card's a great reminder wherever you're out. If you haven't done them yet, then it's a nice, gentle reminder to, maybe we should start doing them. If you have it somewhere, like in a document, in a safe, in a binder, great, put them all in one place. And then if you have that, it's a good time to remind people where that is, or to look at it again, because it's, it's a living document, pun intended, where it can be changed. Your ideas may change. You may play this game and go, oh, maybe I have a little different view on that. So I can change it. It doesn't have to just be set in stone. I can always change my idea of how I want to orchestrate the end of my life.
Mhm, mhm. And Melissa commented to give copies of the documents to your loved ones and doctors, very important as well. I really recommend, I use email to find documents all the time. The more places that you share your information with people, the more likelihood in a frantic moment they can find what they're looking for. So, these are all the practical aspects of preparing. I think we have one last question from the death deck, and then we'll move on to our EOL.
Okay. Would there be differences in how your family would treat your medical condition if you couldn't speak for yourself? A, no, I've been very clear with instructions. B, they would argue but ultimately agree. Or C, yes, they struggle with choosing a restaurant.
So I always find it interesting. I think people think their family members would get along better than they do in crises, from my experience. Even the most loving of family members, when emotions are high and there's decisions to be made, it's difficult for people to come to one understanding, especially when there are significant others and spouses involved and all of the complexities of family systems. So I don't know, Susan, do you have an answer for this, of what your thoughts are?
Our family would, I've actually told my family on the West Coast what I wanted and what I didn't want. That was sort of the impetus for my mother sharing her stuff. But I've just, the two people that I've named as my powers of attorney, and they are moving and not able to do it. So I have to redo my advance directive. So this is all up for me again. And it's a really good reminder that that is not something I should be waiting on doing, but I need to do this now. Our family, my family here in LA, I'm pretty sure I need to sit down and have another conversation with them about that. My other siblings, I think, would be minimally involved, to be honest with you.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a great reminder, Susan. We do advanced directives, and it is something that we should revisit, every 5 years at minimum, to make sure that where we're at with our health, with our relationships with people, with the information we now have, that is still consistent. And so, yeah, sometimes people move, sometimes people die, sometimes, I've had so many situations where people have never revisited, and the people that they've picked are deceased, and so it's not really helpful anymore. So we just encourage everybody to keep checking in on those documents once you've done them. Melissa did comment that.
Sorry, somebody commented on something. My healthcare proxy does not have to be local. That's correct, Melissa. Your healthcare proxy can be wherever you would like them to be. But for me, I want my healthcare proxy local because I have an autoimmune illness that I would be dealing with, and I would want somebody here. So I appreciate your comment, but I also, it's such an individual decision for everybody that giving it a lot of thought. And to Lisa's point, I had like 3 people in my lifetime that I've named died before me as my powers of attorney. So it really is a living and redoing document often, and whenever there's big changes in family so thank you.
Yeah, and to your point, you don't have to, first of all, you don't have to choose a family member.
Right. No.
You can choose a friend, you can choose, you can choose someone who works in healthcare that is a friend or someone that's willing to take that on for you, that you trust their decision making. You know, most people tend to choose their closest family members, but it really isn't always the best person to make the decisions. It really does depend on your family member and whether they are up for the task of honoring your specific wishes and not letting their wishes interfere with yours, and as well as who's an advocate, who's willing to talk about and talk to hospice or medical professionals about what you would want. So I just always encourage people to just give a little more thought than just making it your oldest son or your spouse, or, you know, think about who would really be able to advocate for you in those settings. When I say someone that is in healthcare, I mean that it is a friend, not your doctor or your specific healthcare team, but rather a friend who maybe works in healthcare, or a friend who has an understanding of healthcare that is different from the regular layperson. Okay,
Right.
Lori, let's get started with our EWL deck.
Yes, and do we want to do the polling again, or do we want to save that till the end?
Why don't we, I think it's a little bit too much. Oh, I hear Mike say poll. Okay. Why don't we use the suggestion of giving people just a minute to go through the polling? We have, I think, 8 questions there.
Mhm.
And so we'll have you all take a minute and go through the questions and answer. And then we'll go through the EOL questions kind of one at a time and talk through them.
Okay.
And I just want to make sure I put the poll up. I'm hoping people are seeing it up there.
Yes.
Thank you.
We need some Jeopardy music or something now, Susan. Do, 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 do.
I don't see anything happening in the poll. That's why I was asking if maybe people are just, they're going through it and then they have to submit.
Yes, they have to
Never
answer.
mind. You have to actually be able to read the poll and
Mhm.
Yeah, but you'll see that the tone has changed. You might have noticed a little snarky humor in the death deck, just to kind of throw in a couple of answers to get people to chuckle, but to get more comfortable answering. We're going to pull that humor out because the end of life deck is really more for that end of life space. But we'll hit some similar themes, but not the same exact questions.
Yeah, and you know, because of the different tone and because we are specifically looking at people with serious illness, advanced age, some of the questions you may not, it's just important to kind of keep that in mind as you're answering the questions. It might feel a little different than it's going to feel different than the death deck questions, because those are specifically for all of us, people who aren't near the sorry, I'm getting distracted because I'm also reading the chat, and I know that it might be distracting for us to talk, so we'll give you a couple more minutes. Okay, I'm seeing we're kind of holding steady at the 50%-ish
Yep.
polling. So I know some people are just going to plan to answer in the chat as well. So we'll give it just 30 more seconds and start answering.
That sounds perfect.
All right. So we'll start with this one. Cards or video messages left to be opened by loved ones after my death are A, a beautiful gesture, but I'm not sure I have it in me. B, something I plan to do so I can be with them on special occasions. Or C, depressing and kind of creepy, no thanks.
Okay, so it looks like a lot of people are on the A, 64% in our polling here. I think, you know, when my mother-in-law was dying a couple summers ago, I came in with such good intention, but a little too strong. I really wanted her to create some video messages and cards for her two kids and my son, and eventually it became clear that she just didn't have it in her, and I needed to let that go. And I think that it's pretty common. It's not an easy task to do. I've had hospice patients who have chosen to do that, and we've done some beautiful things together, but it is difficult to do. I think that from my experience, what I've seen is people doing this at random times in their life when they're not seriously ill happens more often than at the end of life, because of how people are feeling illness wise, because of the emotions involved. And so I encourage everybody now, you don't have to wait until you have a serious illness. A girlfriend of mine asked her grandparents to write letters to her kids to open at each of their high school graduations. And so it was such a beautiful opportunity of legacy creating, right? And these beautiful letters that now her kids are going to have from their great grandparents to open at high school graduation. So there's lots of ways to have these kind of messages from the dead, right, that we can do, and they don't have to be with when people are seriously ill. It can be at different points in their life.
All right.
We have some comments about the different types of legacy projects, and that, sometimes we can have a longer period of time of preparing and working with people on legacy, which I definitely agree with on that. Okay, we'll go to the next question.
On special occasions, how could your family honor you? A, lighting a candle and sharing a memory. B, visiting the location of my final resting place. Or C, bringing family and friends together to partake in my favorite meal. Now, I was one to, I would say, over-memorialize, as Lisa could probably attest to. I didn't know what to do, so I did everything, which was very healing to me. But what an incredible gift to give to your loved ones if you gave them an idea, like, after I go, please, go to the beach on the day that I died, and rather than that being such a somber day, put flower petals in the ocean or something that then would give them something constructive to do. So I like this card and what that can, the possibilities that can generate to just give a little idea and to give somebody something to do or to request.
Mhm. It looks like from our polling, people are pretty split. I mean, people pretty much A and C are the most common answers. Obviously, you can do both of these things. They aren't exclusive. I think when my friend was dying, I asked her how she would want us to honor her. And she said that she wanted her celebration of life to take place on her birthday, and that her dad had done that, or they had done that for her dad. And so that's what she wanted for herself. And so that's what we did. We had our celebration of life on her birthday, and we knew that that was her wish. And it also gave us something to do on that first birthday, which felt good too, to have a plan in place. So again, this can just be a meaningful, celebrating anniversaries of deaths, birthdays. These special days can sometimes feel really overwhelming in grief. And so if you're able to have a conversation with your family member about, or when there's another family member and they've died and you're now talking about their birthday coming up, it's a wonderful opportunity to kind of bring up what that person may want as well. Susan, do you have an answer for this one?
You know, I honestly, I think my family could best honor me by living their most authentic life and not living in fear of not living a life that's limited and really living their life to the fullest and really engaging in the things that bring them joy. That would be the best honoring that I could imagine somebody could do.
That's a beautiful answer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For me, it's not really a place. When my friends have died, most of them have ashes scattered, and I have my parents like sitting in my bedroom closet now because we just never have gotten together to spread their ashes. And I feel like really it's just the living like in sort of the legacy that I would like to leave. One, it would be that people would feel comfortable talking about death, dying, loss, and grief, and do that in a sort of regular part of their life. To me, that would be the biggest honoring for me, more than going to dinner or those sorts of things. Yeah.
Beautiful. Yeah.
Hear, hear. I agree.
Oops, what happened here?
And I'm also just aware of the time, and I wonder if maybe we want to go through a couple of these more, and if people have questions, if anybody wants, you could put up in the chat, like just yes or no. Do you have questions? If you'd like to just continue to go through the polls, or if you have questions, I want to make sure that we have time for those. So if people do have questions, just put up, yes, I have a question, or just put your question up. Otherwise we'll raise your hands. Yeah. We're going to put up information at the end about where we are, where you will be able to purchase these decks, and Lisa and Lori are giving a discount to people that have attended this so that you'll have a discount. And we are done at 11:30, Penny. That's correct. Yes.
All right.
Thank
In
you.
your final days, what would you like to smell? A, my favorite foods, fresh baked cookies and coffee, anyone? B, calming scents like lavender, rose, or sandalwood? Or C, fresh air from an open window? Now with the EOL deck, we do have cards that address the senses, because that for me was something that we never discussed. And I felt like I wanted to do something, but I didn't know what exactly to do. So I think it's really important to let people know, how you want to orchestrate that ending, what you would like to smell, if you would like to be touched or not touched, with hugs and things like that, foot massage, do you want that or do you not want that? What you would like to see, what you might like to hear. I think that's very important to let people know what you want.
Yeah, and I recently played this game with another hospice nurse, and we were discussing this question together, and then I discovered that she hates the smell of lavender, and how often our patients are using lavender in these calming aromatherapy ways, but people have distinct things they don't want as well. And so I think, Susan, you mentioned earlier all the things your mom didn't want. And I think that that's really just as important as telling people what you do want. What are you clear that you don't want? Are there scents that you really don't want anywhere near you? Are there, which may change with illness, but are there people that are just going to cause so much distress in you to see towards the end of your life? So we do have questions about visitors, the type of touch you want, if you want people to be touching you or not. That the things you don't want are very important to make clear too.
And then another thing that often isn't addressed is pets. So do you have a plan for your pets? A, I've made arrangements for a specific person to adopt them. B, I have vet health information gathered, but no person designated. Or C, there's no plan in place.
Yeah, so you can actually even do an advanced directive for your pet, which is really helpful. A friend of mine, I'm her healthcare surrogate for her pet. I'm also her healthcare surrogate, so it kind of goes together. But she, in the document, it has all the vet information. It has the immunizations and also just additional information about the pet, how old they are, where they got them, all of these things that if you don't know, this is a topic that often gets a little overlooked in families as they're making their preparations. So part of our purpose with both decks is to provide a little education and help people think about things that they wouldn't normally have thought of that aren't covered in the basic advanced care planning healthcare directives. So pets is one of those. And then I just wanted to see what it looks like we're split pretty evenly between A and C on that one. I was very curious. I had to jump back into that polling to take a look at that. Okay, I'm looking at our chat. How do you play the game other than asking the questions? So with the Death Deck, we encourage people, you can partner up and guess each other's answers. So, if Lori and I were playing with other pairs, Lori and I are going to guess each other's answers, and we get a point for each one that we get right. To me, that's the most fun way to play. It generates a lot of really great conversations because it's not just Lori saying, oh, this is my answer, and I say, oh, this is my answer, but we try to guess each other's answers, and that shows us what we do or don't know about each other, and also creates some pretty lively and fun conversations. This is particularly fun with couples, which we found don't often know each other's answers that well. But you can play that way where you're guessing each other's answers. You can also ask as a group, like how we're doing today, or go back and forth in terms of taking turns answering the questions. We've also had people use the cards for conversation starters at conferences. We've had people hand out a card to each participant at the conference, and then people in their ice breaking go around and talk to each other about the cards and their answers. It can help prime people for these depth conversations and get them thinking about their own thoughts and beliefs instead of just keeping it at arm's distance and thinking about patients or financial planners with their clients and that sort of thing.
Yeah, And we've also encouraged people to, as we said many times, stack the deck. So if you have a family member, I'm recently visiting my father, who's 89 years old, and there's specific questions that I want to ask him. So I will grab those specific cards, maybe 2 or 3 that I would like to talk about. And if I bring the whole deck, I just put them on the top and use those. But you can just grab the ones that might be specific to the conversations that you want to be starting.
Yes, so we do have quite a few other questions. We're just giving you a sampling today. We do have questions on green disposition options, medical aid in dying, other topics that are outside of what you've seen today. So, you know, this is our sampling. And I really love reading everybody's responses in the chat about, you know, their family and the conversations they have had. Nicole mentioned that her 10-year-old told her what 2 songs he wants to play at his funeral, which Lori and I have had the privilege of developing these products while our kids are growing up. And so my son is now 14, and we have a group of 14-year-old boys wandering around Los Angeles area who play the death deck regularly because it's always out, and they find it really interesting to talk about death and dying. And so we encourage everyone, you know, that these are conversations to be had if you're a professional and helping other people with them, but don't forget yourself. Don't forget that it's you know, when I talk to my hospice colleagues, over half of them don't have an advance directive, and I know that that's kind of standard. So we encourage everyone, even if you're working in this space, to think about yourself too.
Yeah. And I think maybe in the essence of time, do you want to go ahead and open it up to questions, and we can, since everyone's seen these in the polls, we can maybe share where you can find us, and we can see if there's any response to something that might have come up. I can't see the questions, so once I stop sharing my screen, but is there anything that you see, Lisa, in particular that
I don't see any questions at this point. People have some comments, and
okay.
I'm wondering if people have a question or they would like to raise their hand in the Zoom fashion. If you click, for some people, it's under the 3 dots to the far right where it says, there's a drop down and it says raise hand. For others, it's under the reactions section where there's a smiley face down at the bottom. If you want to ask sort of in person, but if you would like to just put a question up, you're welcome to do that.
Yeah, and if you want to find out more information about us or the games, you can go to thedeathdeck.com, or you can shoot us an email and we'll put that in the chat at hi@thedeathdeck.com.
And I think, if I'm not mistaken, did Lisa say earlier that there would be possibly, there it goes. Thank you so much. There it is, Lisa. Lisa put up a link there that you're welcome to use. EKR 20 at thedeathdeck.com. They're offering, Lisa and Lori are offering a discount for folks who have attended this. And yes, I really encourage people. This is a very low cost, high impact opportunity to begin conversations. Just even with yourself, going through the deck, to just start to really think, you know, this is my life and this is also my death. And I think that one of the things about the sort of, kind of death movement, or this time we're living in now, where there's death doulas, there's lots of opportunities. For years, the conversation was like, the people don't want to talk about death. I have found that to be almost patently untrue. When there's an opportunity or a space created where there's an opportunity for conversations to happen that aren't about people doing something a certain way, and people can just express what's most important to them, what's most valuable, then these conversations kind of flow. I was on a plane recently and a woman sat down next to me, saw the book I was reading that began a 4.5-hour conversation. I just leaned over to the guy on the aisle and said, please, to excuse us, we're going to be talking about death for about 4.5 hours now. And he put on the best headphones I've ever seen in my life and put on like Top Gun 50 or whatever, as loud as he could. And when the plane landed, we were still like, death, 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 death. She was a death. And the guy got up and tried to run through the crowd of the plane. So it is not for everybody, but you know, when there's an opportunity or an opening, I find that people really do want to discuss this. So thank you.
Yeah, we learned that for sure, that I mean, when we first began talking, I talked about bringing the death deck into the wine bar that I like to go to. And it's interesting when you first look, when you show people a card or you say, hey, I have this game, they might give the, you know, there's often a look of like, what? Like, I wouldn't want to talk about that. But just a question or two, and usually people have, they have so much to say.
Yeah.
And the conversation, and I mean, it's a topic that we don't get to talk. I mean, some of us talk about it all day, all the time, but in general, these are topics that are not really discussed. You know, when we first started, we talked about how we grew up, and most people grew up in a family that didn't really talk about death and dying. And so it takes practice. And so, you know, by playing these games and having these conversations, when you are ill, we're all going to be ill at some point. We're all going to have either a medical crisis or an illness or our health deteriorating. To have the practice of talking about our wishes and talking about death and dying is going to make it so much easier during that time. And so we're so thankful to be here today. I do see a question from Anne. If you want to go ahead and you can.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you for taking my question. So I think this is a great idea. I've been through a lot of sudden deaths in my family over the past years. Tragic deaths, sudden deaths, lots of losses. And it would have been nice to have these cards ahead of time to know the answers to some questions. So I'm really glad that I jumped on this Zoom today. I just wanted to thank you all for setting it up and sharing this information and for creating these cards. I think that's a great idea. My question is, once you go through these decks and get the answers to the questions, how do you document the answers, or where do you store the information? Do you have to have a lawyer look at it? I know like a medical advance directive is in your medical chart, but like, what about the other stuff? What do you guys recommend on that? Or what's your experience on that? Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's quite a few great tools out there that do get into more details about some of these topics. You're right. The advance directive is typically the one that is signed and witnessed and notarized or notarized. But some of these other questions, there's lots of tools, so it's kind of hard to just state one or two, but you know, there's a more specific advanced care planning tool called 5 Wishes that you might be familiar with. 5 Wishes goes into much more detail about what people want at end of life and is a really good written document tool. There's one of our colleagues here in Los Angeles has created her own tool, Death Project Manager. I'll put that in the chat. It's very thorough documentation as well, that goes into, you know, a lot of these specific topics. So I'll rate those.
Is the 5 Tools a website that you can go to get that information, or is that just like a document that's out there somewhere that you can go through? Or
You you can do an electronic version, or they will mail you written, an actual booklet.
Thank
So
you.
you have either option. And I put it in the chat, so 5 wishes, you can Google that. I'm sorry, I don't have the website might be 5wishes.com. I'm not sure. I don't have it off the top of my head.
You know, I just want to respect the time. I see Melissa has her hand up, but I want to formally close the meeting, and I will be able to stay on for like 5 or 6 minutes afterwards. I don't know if either of you can. I do have another meeting that I need to go to. So I just want to thank everybody who's here today. I in particular want to thank Lisa and Lori for just a wonderful, wonderful community education event. I want to thank the folks that are here who have donated to be here. I really appreciate that. For those that are in a position to be able to support the foundation, I did put up some information up about that. We really do depend on you, and I really just want to thank you all. We also understand that not everybody's in a position to do that. So there will be a recording sent to you, hopefully in the next week. With this information, I will include 5 Wishes website on that email as well. And I'm going to end the formal part of the recording now. Just thank you all so very much on behalf of the foundation and on behalf of me. Thanks.